Hello and thanks for coming. Geese of Gear, episode number 247. Today's podcast is brought to you by ACT Entertainment. Unlock your potential with the ACT Academy New Professionals Bundle, exclusively designed for students and educators in North America. This comprehensive package provides not only access to the entire Grand MA3 beginner learning path, but also a Grand MA3 Viz Key with the power to unlock the most exciting visualization tools on the market today, tailored to empower a new generation of professionals and the educators who train them. The New Professionals Bundle equips you with the skills and tools needed to excel in tomorrow's entertainment lighting industry. Whether you're a student aspiring for a passion-driven career or an educator striving to inspire, the ACT Academy New Professionals Bundle is a massive opportunity you won't want to overlook. Visit actentertainment.com today. And this episode is also brought to you by GearSource. Founded in 2002 with an ambitious mission to support live events businesses buy and sell gear globally. Since that time, the company has transacted in more than 100 countries, selling $250 million in sound, lighting, staging, and video gear. GearSource continues to evolve the platform for massive global growth, enabling localized currencies, payments held in escrow to protect buyers and sellers, AI-powered logistics behind a new global logistics brand, and much more. Throughout 2024 and beyond, the company will continue to grow its toolbox for the benefit of users worldwide. So now, why not take full control over your gear with a visit to gearsource.com? Hello, and here we are. So, the most recent episode, 246, with Finn. So Sarah edited that one, and she wanted to make sure I told you that because I think everyone thinks she's just another pretty blonde hanging around helping us. And nope, she actually does stuff. So Sarah edited and uploaded her first episode without much help from me. I won't say any help from me. She had a few technical issues, nothing major. And we worked on it as a team and we got it done. So from now on, Sarah is going to be editing, uploading, and scheduling the podcasts. So, yeah. A singular clap for Sarah. Good job. So an interesting story just popped in for me. You might know that my son Jeremy is a racing driver, and a lot of our listeners either love racing or they tolerate it for my behalf. And so F1 News is an interesting story connecting our world and the F1 world. So a company called Explore did some pretty innovative work along with Final Pixel and Red Bull Racing, creating a campaign that launched the winning RB19 car. And so as they launched the car, and they won an award on this video that they created. Sorry, I'm trying to read notes from Sarah while I'm also talking. Anyways, Explore, Final Pixel, and Red Bull Racing worked on this campaign around the launch of the RB19 car, and they won an award at the Cannes Film Festival. So as a side note, which is really cool, our friends at Production Park handled the filming. The film was done at Studio 4 in the UK at Production Park. And, of course, Red Bull created this video on the F1's first ever virtual production shoot. And so the car won, of course. They won the championship. And so, yeah, the shoot blended archive footage, video plats, drone shots with scenes produced in Unreal Engine, CGI, and VFX. And so then she sends me this big, long link that I'm supposed to read. which is basically productionpark.co.uk news, and then you can look for Oracle Red Bull Racing campaign. But pretty cool story and cool project. And again, it ties sort of my two passions, racing, or two of my passions, racing and the live events industry. In other news this week, the DOJ sued Live Nation and Ticketmaster last week. I'm sure many of you have seen that and read the articles and interviews and both sides of the story. I've tried to review, stuff written by or said by both sides. And the Fed appear to have a pretty strong case. It certainly looks like a monopoly on the surface. If you look at it, Live Nation now owns the artist contracts, management, venues, ticketing. It's kind of the definition of a monopoly. So, it's hard to compete against them, that's for sure, whether you're a venue or a promoter or a ticketing company or whatever it is, because they kind of have this whole 360 thing going on. And of course, Live Nation is blaming venues and artists, and the DOJ is blaming Live Nation and Ticketmaster. And the reality is, even if the Fed forces the companies to break up, it's highly likely that ticket prices will not go down for the end consumer, because what will likely happen is that whatever drop in cost that is will just be eaten up by one or all parts of that system. So as an example, Taylor Swift tickets are $2,000, let's say. And if Ticketmaster and Live Nation are forced to break up, it's not like suddenly those ticket prices go down to $500 or something. So certainly one could argue that Ticketmaster and Live Nation are charging fees that are a little higher than necessary, but the fees only make up a small part of that ticket cost still. So, even if the fees on a $2,000 ticket are, I don't know, I'm making this up, but let's say it's $400, 20% of the cost of the ticket. $400 on the surface looks really ridiculous. That looks like a super high fee for getting me a ticket to go see this concert. But there's still $1,600 sitting there. And where's that going? That's going in Taylor Swift's pocket. So still the artist is making most of that money. The venue's making some of that money. And the other problem is you have to address the secondary market. And by that, I mean resales. So fans reselling their tickets or scalpers. And you've got all these sites like SeatGeeks and whatever they are. There's thousands of them out there right now, marketplace sites where people buy tickets for $200 and sell them for $600 or whatever it is. I have a friend with Florida Panthers season tickets, and because they're playing against New York, and you have so many rich New Yorkers who live in Florida now, everybody wants tickets to go see the Rangers hopefully beat up on the Florida Panthers, and they're willing to pay for it. And so I don't know what face value is on those tickets, probably $200 each. They're paying $700 or $750 or $800. And so, it's intriguing to the person who owns those tickets to say, hey, let's say it becomes a 4-game home series. And in this case, I think it can only be 3 because the Rangers had home ice advantage. So let's say it's a 3-game series of home tickets because the series goes to 7 games. So if I sell one game for $800, that pays more than enough for the other 2, plus parking, plus a couple of beers. And by the way, I went to a game on Sunday. Beer was $19.50. This is nuts. $19.50 for a beer at a hockey game. Come on. And parking was $65. And I mean, it's insane. You without even the ticket, without paying to see the game, you're spending, no matter what, you're spending $100. No matter what. I don't care if you, by the way, water was $9.50. I mean, or no, $8.50. Sorry, it was $8.50 for a bottle of water. Come on now. And I'm not talking those big, huge bottles of smart water or whatever. I'm talking a bottle of water. So anyways, as much as we want to blame Live Nation and Ticketmaster exclusively, my point isn't that they're angels and that they're flawless or perfect. My point is that there's sort of a lot of hands in this cookie jar right now, and you can't, typical of the DOJ, they want to make a big press release and say, aha, we're throwing away nuisance fees and attacking the monsters that are creating them. They're part of a system, and the whole system is creating these high prices on concert tickets. And I wish it was all going to production companies, by the way. I wish it was going to sound engineers and managers and production managers and lighting designers and stuff. It's not, there's certainly some of those prices are going up a little bit, but they're not getting the bulk of it. The bulk of it is going to the artist still. So as much as the artist wants to sit quietly back and let Live Nation take all the punches, the artist is as responsible as anyone in this. And then again, the secondary market, the resales. I'm going to cut you some slack because we're going a bit long here already. I won't go heavily into AI today, but I will tell you that I'm working right now to schedule a podcast with Bob Boniel, who, like myself, has taken a real interest in this topic. And so Bob and I are going to do a podcast just about AI and as it relates to our industry. So that should be an interesting talk. I'm thinking about making it a live stream so that we can then take questions and take comments live while we're going. So we'll see. I got to talk to Bob about that and see what he thinks and make sure that it fits the current technology that I'm using, which is constantly evolving. But yeah, that could be fun or will be fun because Bob is very knowledgeable on the topic and he's a smart guy. So I look forward to it. And as always, please, wherever you're listening to or watching this, like and subscribe. It helps me. It helps the podcast tremendously when you like and or subscribe to the podcast. It helps us to get additional viewers, which helps us to get more guests, which helps us to get more sponsors. And it just keeps this machine running. So I appreciate it. We appreciate it very much. Please like and subscribe. And with that, today's guest, finally an audio guy. We've had way too many lighting people, I think. Joe Casanova is the sales executive and managing partner and co-founder of SAV Entertainment, specializing in audio, RF coordination, communications, systems design and engineering, box rentals, and much more. Joe started back in the 80s on the rental and production side of Century Music Systems and worked as a staff engineer prepping tours, repairing equipment, training new road staff, and then engineering shows for Showco. Some of the artists Showco worked with were Prince, Vince Gill, Eric Clapton, James Taylor, the Rolling Stones, and Paul McCartney. Joe also served as the audio product manager, working directly with manufacturers on new product ideas and vendors with new purchases. In addition, he conducted market research on new equipment and developed market strategies for recent trends and pricing. For nearly 17 years, Joe was the senior national account executive and co-founder of the audio division at VER. Welcome, Joe Casanova, to the podcast. Joe, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. Were you saying you've never done a podcast?
Never.
Wow.
Never.
You're the one.
Never, ever. Yeah.
That's
Never,
amazing.
ever. Yeah.
So,
Listen to plenty of them.
Yeah.
But never, watch plenty of them, but never, nobody's ever asked me, hey, been in, magazine articles and, stuff like that, the trade magazines, but never just,
That's wild. Like
never just like we're doing now.
I would say
the first time for everything, right?
I would say 90% of our guests have been on multiple podcasts, and a lot of our guests are on mine more than once too. Like you were just mentioning John Wiseman earlier, and I think he's been on 3 or 4 times. He's one of my real good buddies in the industry.
He's always got something to say, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. And you don't even have to ask him; it just comes out.
He'll let you know, won't he?
Well, the other thing I love about John is he's so willing to be so transparent and honest.
Yep.
And, especially having gone through what he went through, with addiction. And he will tell you, he'll tell you the deepest, darkest stories. And on my podcast, he talked about borrowing money from his parents to go to rehab, a guy who's that successful, in his job and having to borrow money from his parents to go to rehab.
Yeah. No,
pretty real stuff.
it's very humbling, and he's seen, all aspects of the industry, for sure. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No, I feel so fortunate. I'm so grateful to do this because, this is episode 247, I think. Plus, we did a whole bunch of other sort of outside stuff. I
Hmm.
love doing this. I love, like you and I, we were talking before we started recording. I think we met at a trade show, but I don't think either one of us is positive of that. But we certainly don't have a relationship. So I get to learn who you are and how you became who you are and all of that stuff over the next hour or so. And I love doing that. Like, I love people's stories. And, do you know Finn, Mike
Um,
Finn?
no, the
big
name
big
sounds
fin
familiar. Yeah.
big fin productions. These are mostly lighting people, but
Right.
I had Finn, everyone in the industry knows him. I didn't know him, and I had him
Right.
on recently. Actually, I think it launches tomorrow. And just super cool getting to know these people, like, just amazing. I love it. It's so much fun.
Yeah, I'm always amazed, especially with that, with Facebook and social media, where it gives you recommendations on who you should be friends with or connect
Yeah,
with. And it was like, there's people out there. It was like, how does this person and myself have, 200 people, we're in the same circle, but we've never met, or we don't even know each other.
yeah,
That's where I'm blown away, because this industry is so small compared to
yeah.
other
That's
industries.
what I
And
was
it's
gonna
like,
say.
that's
Yeah,
why
it is.
I always tell the young kids, I was like, don't ever burn bridges, because you never know,
Yeah.
when you're going to be working with whoever, down the
Yeah,
road.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the post VER people who are floating around, or you're at VER and you're hating on PRG every day about
Yeah.
those guys suck. We're so much better and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And next thing you
Yeah.
know, you're under the same roof.
Yeah.
You
That,
know,
that, that, right. That conversation right there could be a whole nother podcast of just the two, of just how two big companies kind of,
yeah,
merge together. And then,
yeah.
yeah, it's a whole other
Yeah,
story,
I know the
you know?
story so well. Like, I was so
Yeah.
close to Jerry and the group of companies that he originally started putting
Sure.
together under the
Sure.
PRG banner,
Yeah.
and just some of the mistakes that they made.
Yeah.
They were sort of the OG of rolling up companies in our industry. Like, they were the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
one to do it.
buying a lot of industries. I remember when it was like, I really didn't, early on, I remember Randy Hudson selling his company, because Randy Hudson
Yeah,
he had Hudson Audio, and
yeah,
he's like, yeah, he was real successful. He lived here in the Dallas Metroplex, and and he was an ex Showco guy as well. So
right.
we knew each other, and we would do business. And then just out of nowhere, he was real successful at doing a lot of these car shows and corporate stuff like that. When they used to call them industrial shows, before they
Yeah,
called them corporate.
yeah,
And he was like, yeah, I'm just gonna sell my company to this PRG. Then all of a sudden you start hearing these other companies just kind of follow along. It's like,
yeah. No,
just like
I
VLPS, like they're like, they,
yeah.
same thing, right?
Well, no, but Four Wall out buying up sort of the mid-sized companies.
Yeah,
Solotech is buying a lot of companies.
yeah,
But PRG really was sort of the OG. Like, they
they
started
were,
in the '90s,
they
rolling
did,
companies together,
yeah,
and before you know it, they were this massive. I remember when they were called the Borg, but
yeah,
now look, there's other companies that are at least as big, and in some cases bigger.
absolutely,
And it seems to be a model
absolutely,
that continues going. Like, you know, Christy Lights is getting bigger and bigger now. And on the audio side, certainly Claire buying up companies.
yeah,
Uh,
no kidding.
you know, I, I don't know what your thoughts are on it, and you might share some neat thoughts on this one because
I
you
think my
worked.
thoughts are a couple of things. Is like what comes to mind. It was like when you work for a company that big and you have that many locations, it's really really tough operationally to just to to make things happen sometimes, and it's really expensive too, and you've got to have a really really good software program. At
Yeah,
VER, we were just using, one off the shelf, and you'd only have, when I joined VER, we only had maybe 3 or 4 offices. I joined real early on. As a matter of fact, when I met the owner, No, I was working for another. Let's start back. Let's start way back. I guess I
Yeah.
was starting. I was working for. I had left Shoko. Um, um, I think in 2000 because they were bought out by Claire Brothers, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, I had a friend of mine, Randy Williams. He was working for this company. It was an AV company called AVW. They're now called Freeman. And he goes, man, you got to come over here. His boss was another Shoko guy, and he goes, we do these corporate jobs, and you're working in hotels, ballroom stuff, and we got this real simple PA, and I was like, man, sounds great. Sign me up, I'll do it. And I was like, I remember, one of the first corporate jobs I ever did was like the hardest job I've ever done in my life. I wasn't used to, people telling me, well, you can't put the speakers there and you can't put the speakers there. You got to put them over here. You got to mix from, over here on the side, And
Yeah.
when in rock and roll, it was like speakers are going here and I'm setting up here. And it was like, you didn't have anybody to tell you what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Funny.
you got to put the PA way high up there because, we got these screens and you can't block the screens, whatever you do. So stuff like that. And then it was like, oh, by the way, we're going to have like 10 guys on stage and they all have to wear a lav, and it was like, what? And it was like, oh, by the way, on comms, you have to run comms for, everybody that's in the production. When, I was used to like, front of house monitors, done. That was it, and half the time, the belt pack and the flasher were just already connected and, they just lived in the doghouse of the mixing console,
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
Well, but the point, so the point I was making is that, like, when you look at companies like Claire now, who own tons of different audio companies, and or Four Wall or any of these roll up companies, Solo Tech. When you look at those companies, like you said, there are some challenges to being that big. Operational challenges. You got to have real disciplines in place. One of the early problems that PRG ran into was infrastructure, like things like road cases and cabling not matching. When you're trying to pack a truck and you got different size road cases for the same product, for example, it became problematic. Or when you were doing cross rentals between company owned businesses and the stuff didn't have the same connectors on the ends or the whatever it was, right? But then what the point I was going to make is where you would have some really unique experience. When you're large, you have access to resources. When you're small, you don't. And I think as many of these companies continue to grow through acquisition and through investment from private equity or venture or whatever it is, it's becoming more challenging, I think, for the smaller businesses to be able to compete. Especially as resources are becoming so much more, like a sound system now costs so much money. A console costs so much money. It's not like it was 20 years ago or whatever.
No.
So
all that's just evolved because it was like, in manufacturing, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. It was like, back in the day, there was so many amplifiers and there was so many different model mixing boards, but the one industry you could get into that didn't cost a lot of money was just building a speaker. Back then everybody had their own proprietary speaker. Claire built her own, Shoko built her own speaker. And so on. But it's one of those where it's like, you get a CNC machine, you buy, some really good wood, you maybe know something about acoustics and, speaker design, and you buy the drivers, and all of a sudden you're in the speaker business. Whether it sounds good or not, that's subjective. But it's just one of those things that people started building. When I first went to Shoko, I was just blown away. I was working for a small regional company, in San Antonio, and I found an ad, in Pro Sound News. Hey, work for Shoko, and it was that iconic logo that they had, and I was like, I'm just gonna call one day, and I ended up talking to somebody there, and sure enough, I bought a Southwest Airlines plane ticket and flew myself there, and I met with them, and I remember you walk in, and it's just a typical office, lady at the front desk, but then you start looking around and you start looking at all these photos of ZZ Top
Oh,
and the
yeah.
Rolling Stones. It was just
Incredible.
and Shoko was just, and Shoko Verlight. They had their own staff photographer named Louis Lee, and he's like,
Yeah.
he was
I
like an
remember that.
iconic. Just he was a industry. He's really a pioneer of just photography of concerts. And it was
Yeah.
like, they had the Moody Blues, and just go down the list of just all
Yeah.
the Shoko clients of just all these posters all the way around the building. And, I walked down the hallway, and I passed up ML Pro Size, which was like, man, that was like one of the reasons I wanted to work there. I just, he was the, engineer of engineers, they had
Yeah.
all these tech awards, and stuff. So I get out to the warehouse, and it's just this massive, warehouse, and they've got just speakers everywhere. And I just remember seeing Crown amplifiers where, and all this outboard gear. And I just, the sound company I work for, we had like maybe 2 or 3 racks of amp racks, while they just had amp racks laying around like it was cordwood, like
Yeah.
it was just nothing. It was just like they had plenty, and they were prepping for I can't remember whatever tour it was at the time,
Something
but I
big.
was just blown away. Something massive.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, well, this is the company I want to work for sure. At that time, the 2 biggest companies were just Shoko and Claire, and then there was Audio Analyst, and there was, I can't remember the other ones, but, they were all out there.
Yeah.
And I was just, I just wanted to be part of it,
Yeah.
for sure. I just
Yeah,
thought
I can
it was the
completely.
coolest thing.
It's funny because I've heard similar stories. Like George Masick told me a similar story about Verilight. Basically, like when I walked through that building, I was like, "This is where I want to be," and very similar story. And I mean, that was sort of, again, when we talk about the foundation of our industry. That's what it was about. It was like, hey, I really want to go do these cool shows with the Rolling Stones and all these people. And, but yeah, so many different directions we can go here because
I know. I keep on. It's my fault. I keep on going.
No, it's all good. I do the same thing. There literally are a lot of things we can talk about because I want to pick your brain on so many things. But let's start with, your career. Because I know you started like around the mid '80s or something, right?
I graduated high school in 1986, right? And like I said, I grew up in San Antonio, and I got into this business because all my friends were musicians. It just worked out that way, It was like, when I was in 6th grade, a buddy of mine, I went to a private, parochial, Catholic school,
Yeah.
and one of my buddies, his name was Michael Jones, he had come to, I met him in the 6th grade. He had transferred over from public school. And then he had a mutual friend. He had a friend that he introduced me to. His name was John Boyd. And John was, he was a musician, and he was learning to play bass. And all of a sudden, he had a little band, and the band just, as we got friends, the band kept getting bigger, regionally, and they would play, back in the day, you would just hire a band to play your school prom or your, or a homecoming or just a party, stuff like that. And that's how I just got involved. I was just hanging around, I wasn't good enough to play, an instrument. I was more of I just like to tinker with things, My parents got me a soldering iron when I was early on, and I would take apart the can opener and just stuff like that, just figure, I was like, why doesn't this work? My dad and my grandfather, they were both, tinkerers as well. Because back then, something broke, you fixed it yourself. That was just the thing.
Joe? That's why I'm in sales, because I would take apart the can opener and I could never put it back together again.
You just leave it,
yeah, that was it. I just leave a whole bunch of pieces sitting there and hope my parents didn't notice, or I put it back together without the one important piece that made it all work. Right?
How come I got all these extra screws? What the
that's me.
No, I would do that, and then it was one of those to where I went to college, and then the guys called me. They were playing down on 6th Street in Austin, and he was like, hey, you really need to come down here. We've got a sound guy, and he's just not cutting it. He's missing all the cues, and it just doesn't sound right. And they're like, just come down and just stand next to him and tell him, what to do. Because, part of mixing a band, just like running lights for a band, is to know the cues and to know the parts of the song, right? The other part of it is the technology part of it. You know?
I can't
So
imagine that went well, though, standing next to a sound guy and telling him
yeah,
what to do.
to a seasoned guy with tattoos,
Exactly.
ponytail and
Yeah.
smoking cigarettes.
Oh, I'm
And
sure he just
here I am.
happily listened to you.
Yeah, he had a good attitude because I don't think he
Oh, that's
wanted to
cool.
be there to begin with. And he goes, here, why don't you finally, after, I think he finally got fed up. And then he was like, here, you do it. Here are the faders and here's that. And all of a sudden I was like, hey, I'm doing this. This is it, and I just
Yeah.
started to figure it out, and I was like, man, this is really neat. You're really, being an audio engineer, you're kind of like the fifth Beatle to a certain extent. You're playing the, Buford Jones says this a lot. He goes, your instrument is the soundboard. That's what you're doing. You're mixing
Yeah.
that. So I never thought of it that way until years ago. I listened to him speak at a Meyer conference or something, and I was like, wow, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That's somebody
true.
you should have on your show. Talk about stories, gosh.
Who?
Buford Jones.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Sarah will reach out.
Yeah,
Sarah will reach out.
Great human being, and just boy, he's got some stories to tell you.
Yeah.
From
we
back
love stories. So that was the beginning of your career.
So
right
was it. I was doing that, and then I was going to college at the same time, and I got a job at a music store. It was called Century Music Systems in San Antonio, and I
remember Century Music. I think I was doing business with Century Music at Martin, like in the 90s.
Probably, yeah, for sure. Yeah, they were based in San Antonio. They're kind of a two-store operation, but part of what they did as well, they did rentals and stuff, and they did backline rentals and whatnot. But they also had, they had a small production company where we would go out and, do gigs down at, we would do whatever it was, whether it was a fashion show all the way up to doing sound out at, there's in South Texas, there's a dance hall everywhere. So we were doing, a lot of those, regional, back when that's when Americana was just starting up, I guess. It was getting more popular, the Robert O'Keefe and the Jerry Jeff Walker and bands like that. I call them three name guys.
Yeah.
It was that was going on. So we're just doing stuff like that until finally I just worked there long enough to where it's like, gosh, I just feel like I'm outgrowing this company and the owners just, they didn't want to move forward. They just wanted to say, let's keep it small. And I was ready to just, man, I want to do something bigger, And that's when I just answered the ad at Shoko, and I was like, and that's when I worked there, I worked there from 94 up until the time,
that's a huge jump from Century Music to Shoko.
It was a huge jump. And I was like, but I caught on quick because, back then it was like, there was only a handful of mixing consoles, there was like a PM3000 and you had these Ramza Monodisc, but what they had that nobody else had, they had these Harrison consoles that were built specifically for them. And those were just a game changer. Not a lot of other companies had them. And Shoko was one of the first to build their own mixing board called the Super Board, which was amazing. This is back in the 70s, where they were able to just manufacture and build their own console because there wasn't anything else like it. You couldn't go out and buy a, we used to joke, it's like you couldn't buy a store-bought speaker, they just didn't make it. You had to build it yourself, and you had to build it with, components with, that the manufacturer had, you look back at it and it was like, gosh, these speakers were only, they're only this powerful, and you're doing, they were doing these massive concerts. Now, they have speakers that were, 3 times as powerful. It's crazy.
In the lighting business, we always talk about sort of these like game-changing big moments in the industry or whatever. And shortly after Verilight, there was sort of the advent of moving lights for sale. So, we went from these static lights to moving lights in, call it the late 80s, early 90s. And then, went from moving mirrors to moving heads, and went from from that to like from lamps to LEDs, and all of these big changes that happened. And control, there was big changes on the control side. But in audio, so I used to play in bands in the early 80s, and we had like JBL W bins and these I forget what I think it was like Altec
I'll take Lansing.
Altec horns.
Yeah,
and
horns, right.
I forget what the mids were. I think they might have been JBL boxes or something too.
Sure.
But, and I remember when we went from using those W bins and stuff to Martin with what was the Martin thing called? What did they call that thing? Like it had a funny name, the shaver or razor or something shave.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Oh,
I know what you're talking about, though.
Something shave. I forget. But anyways, you know, when you went to those Martin bins and they were 15s and they just sounded incredible and it was so much smaller and more compact. But then, like, so one of the cool things about being our age is that you got to see these massive shifts in technology, like just monumental changes in the industry, generations, you know?
Yeah.
And so you saw the shift into these, you know, fiberglass boxes where they were firing backwards and reflecting out and all these different types of technologies. But then it went from stacked speakers to line array and from audio consoles to digital.
Let me interrupt you. I remember when that first happened, and it was like, this story was told to me by another close friend of mine. His name's Stuart Bennett, and he's a very popular, you know, touring engineer. And he was telling me he was out on tour with like Soundgarden or something like that, and he was in Europe. And he came back, and I remember he went into the office, you know, there at Shoko, and he talked to, you know, one of the bosses, and he was like, "You wouldn't believe, you know, I was at this venue there, and they had this line array with a bunch of speakers, and they were just, you know, all, you know, in an array, you know, vertically, and it sounded amazing." And I remember Stuart telling me, I was like, "Well, what'd they tell you?" You know, it was like, you know, he was kind of convincing this is where it's going. This is where we need to be, as opposed to just the big, massive, you know, stack it high, deep. You know, at Shoko they had, you know, the prison system, which is phenomenal in itself. But this was just a different way to look at it, you know. And the fact that you could, you know, you had a program and you were able to change the angle of every speaker to where, you know, you could point every speaker where it needed to be from, you know, people in the, you know, in the 300 section all the way down to, you know, people on the floor, you know, where you just have, you know, great coverage. Yeah. Whereas, you know, before Choco, you just set it up and just, you know, I had a friend tell me,
you just made it loud enough so it reached every
I had a friend
seat.
that told me one time, "Hey, just point the speakers where the people are going to be." Well, that makes a lot of sense. You know?
Yeah.
So, but then I go, "Well, what did they tell you? You know, what did he say?" He goes, "They just didn't want to hear it. It was like, go back in the shop. You know, we've got, you know, they were just so proud of, you know, of what they had, and they just thought and that for the longest time, their system was the best out there compared to other sound companies out there, you know."
Yeah.
So it was just amazing to hear that. And that was, you know, that was in the late 90s. Now it's like, you know, now, you know, and for the longest time, you know, line array was just kind of it was a phenomenon. It was just a buzzword, you know. I remember VER people, I need to book a line array. Okay, well, let me just ask some questions real first. How tall are your, you know, like how tall are your ceilings? You know, it's just like a 12-foot ballroom, you know, not, I was like, well, you don't need a line array for that one, you know.
Stands.
Exactly. And that was just one of those where people were like, you know, it just became a thing. But yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
How it has. I want to say that, you know, the gear itself it's probably, I don't know, maybe 30% even more lighter, you know, than what the gear is now, you know, and it's just built way more efficient. I bet you could probably, you know, being in bands, I don't know what instrument you played, but you just remember the guitar player having to move his position of the pickups. That way he wouldn't get a buzz from the neon beer signs, you know, or something like that.
No,
you know?
Of course.
Yeah.
But so when did you use your first, like when did you mix on your first line array system?
Gosh, it wasn't probably until, it was probably when at VE, it was probably at VER is when when I joined, we didn't have anything. When I first joined VER, I had met with the owner and he hired me like right off the bat because I had told him That Vince, correct.
Yeah.
He had picked me up, and we had breakfast at Bob's Big Boy in Glendale. That was like his spot.
Yeah.
And he was just asking me all these questions, just left and right, just kind of just peppering me with all these questions. And at the time, I met him because I was working. I took a seat back. I took a step back from going on the road, and I became like the cross rental guy. I took a desk job, and the guy I replaced, he goes, well, you want to start calling if we need cameras or something. You want to talk to this company. They just opened up in Dallas. They're called VER. They're called Video Equipment Rentals, and talk to them. So I had a rapport with them, ordering gear, and I told them one time, I was like, gosh, if you guys had more audio gear, I would probably rent it from you, because back then there wasn't just a place where you could go and get everything. You'd have to call this company for that, and this. You'd have to kind of piece it together, and that's how it was back then. There wasn't just a go-to place where you could just get everything like you can now.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought was just. I was like, so then the wheels in my head was like, well, if VR got more into audio, then we could do something. So I talked Vince into it. I told him what my idea was, and he hired me like that.
Wow.
And at the time, there was only one other audio guy. His name was Brady Bolovic, and all we really had were just speakers on sticks, some wireless mics, some random stuff, not a full system. And it wasn't until we got there and people started calling, hey, do you got this? Do you have that? And we just went bananas. And it was like from 2000, I started working there, I think 2001, 2002. From then on, we just never stopped. It just snowballed up until the time that, we started getting more into, touring, audio touring, and everything else. And it was just nonstop. We
And
never stopped buying gear. So to answer your question, it was we had bought the JBL Vertec had come out, and we had bought 80, 80 and 80 of the four different style of boxes that they had. And we had partnered up with Sound Image because we had built. That was our first rental, where we became. That's where we became the solution for a lot of companies, where let's say X band decides, hey, we want to go out on a summer tour, and usually most sound companies they're sold out. You want to be sold out in the summer, right? Well, we were their problem, where it's like, all right, well, let's go to this company VR. So we built our amp racks identical to theirs, so that way we would. We even went to their warehouse in San Diego, and we built the amp racks there.
That's
and
smart.
We matched up with them, and then but it was so random, because I would just go to different companies and tell them, hey, if you need extra cabinets, we're kind of Switzerland. Hey, we'll rent to you, and they'd be like, you're just gonna rent us cabinets, not even send a guy or any. I was like, no, we'll just rent them to you. You guys know what you're doing. Just don't blow it up. That was it. And that's when then all of a sudden it just never stopped. Like
yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah. Well, you guys
really
got so good
tough,
at cross rentals. Whether it was lighting, video, or audio, that became a really big niche. Obviously.
Yeah. It is, being in the rental business, that's when I was like, gosh. I always tell people, if I was to start it all over again, if I had my own client or a handful of clients, I would use a company like that to do everything. I'd make them be my warehouse, my trucking company, my logistics company, my GearSource, just everything, and just work from the kitchen table. And do it that way.
It makes things a lot lighter on the cost side of things.
It does,
like
and you're always getting the latest, greatest gear. Because what I thought was cool about VER is that they never put their logo on anything. They're all their cases were black, and they didn't really have, as far as branding or their big logo. They didn't do any of that. They would just show up and
Yeah. No, it was a really good company until it wasn't.
Exactly right. Right. Yeah.
I mean, right around that VER time is also when consoles started moving from analog to digital too, right?
Absolutely.
And so what was that like for you?
That was the first. Well, it went back to Shoko, where it was like there was still, I remember. So Shoko, they had come out when Kiss went out on tour. Their engineer Toby Francis, he went out and bought this console called an AMEC Recall, and it was kind of like an analog console, but it was kind of like a digital console where it would recall all your settings from. Let's say you had multiple bands. Well, it would remember your settings from the other band. So it was like kind of the beginning of digital consoles. And then Shoko built their own digital console with the help of Harrison, and it was called the Show Console. And that was another amazing thing where it was like, it had all the rotaries in there, and it was like you would actually see faders move up and down, and you'd see the pots move, like somebody's, doing it for you. And I was like, wow, this is bananas. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until, the other manufacturers, especially like Yamaha, started coming out with digital consoles, and it just became the norm, and, all these young kids started coming up, where they were like, they were trained and learned on these digital desks, which was really the game changer. Cause I call all those young kids, they were just kind of the young kids with laptops, they just knew everything. They knew all the programs, and they just really got it. There's a whole church group of people that are they're just amazing at they're just smart, and they just know how to.
It was funny how that all
stuff,
happened. Well, I guess it was a little later than the lighting business. The lighting business was sort of the late 90s when they went from like the big Avo huge console to the little tiny Hog console, Hog 2.
Right.
And but then the same thing happened to audio, where your consoles got a lot smaller. It's amazing, how much easier front of house got when you guys all went to digital consoles.
Yeah, I bet the promoters like that, a smaller footprint out in front of house, you can sell more seats.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, it's just amazing. Like I said, how it's just evolved, a smaller, more compact, just overall better electronics and parts.
Yeah.
Than how it was before. A funny story, it wasn't that long ago that I went to see a friend. He was doing a show out at the Gaylord here in Dallas. So I went out there, and it was like, I was just, I wasn't blown away, but it made me think back. I was like, man, not that long ago, the setup wouldn't be anything like this. He had a small digital console, and it's like he didn't even have, what we would call a copper snake, a multi-channel snake. He had just a Cat5 cable going to a rack that lived backstage. And then, with all these different protocols, Maddie and Dante and all this stuff, he was able to plug in all his wireless rack of wireless racks. Well, that was just again, it was just a Cat5 into the console. I was like, what? And then it was like, all the lights were just all LED lights. It was like no dimmer rack, no ETC, whatever.
Yeah.
It was all just, it was just a distro
how things
where
have
they
changed.
just wanted, and just a DMX cable.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, where's your distro? I don't even think they had a distro. He tied into the lighting. He got his power from the lighting distro. When with that, back when we were doing it, it was like it wasn't possible. It wasn't even frowned upon. It was like, you can't do it. It's not going to work. You're going to get a buzz. It's like, no, that's how they do it. And I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
This
to this day, I used to be able to walk up to a Soundcraft console or some kind of an analog console and, turn some things and move some things and make it sound half decent, for my own band or for another band.
You can at least get sound out of the board.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about like a 40-channel Soundcraft console or something, right? Mm-hmm. But today, I don't even know how to turn them on, and then you get into Dante and all the plugins and stuff, and where's my effects rack? Where's my outboard? And it's just so different now. And lighting, I've stayed up on. Audio, I haven't. Audio just went way past me. Audio's over my head at this point.
They just keep pushing. The envelope, and it was like, gosh, now, there's a company out there. where it was like, well, what else can they do to speakers? They can make them lighter. They can make them, they can make the rigging easier, quick. But now, there's this company called PK Audio, and they're from, I want to say they're from Calgary. They're
PK Sound. Yeah,
PK
Sound.
Sound.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
are
you've
in
heard of them.
Calgary.
They are in Calgary.
Yeah, with the
So these
motorized
guys,
thing.
I think the owner's name is Jeremy, I think.
Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah, Bridges.
Yeah,
Jeremy Bridges.
Bridges, that's it. Where they've got a PA now to where the cabinets will just kind of, they've got robotics and servos in there where they'll just open up and do their own thing. And it was like, wow, that's awesome.
No, I got last summer. I went in and saw that system, and it's, to me, and I compare it to when I first saw moving lights. Like when I first saw lights go like this and adjust their beams, I was like, whoa. And I had the same feeling. Like, why would anybody ever want fixed position lighting again? When I saw that audio system move, I got the same feeling. I was like, why would you want to drop a rig to the ground and have to change all of the rigging and stuff and then lift it up again and go, okay, now it's good. And when you could
it's
just
smart.
hit a button.
Think it's just smart, It's just super smart and it's really brilliant. And I remember having breakfast with Jeremy. This is back when we were at VR and we were like at a NAM or an Infocom, and we were having breakfast, and there was other guys at the table, and I just asked him, I was like, why did you do this? What made you do this? And he goes, well, we were, I owned a sound company and we were using, I can't remember whatever brand speakers there were. And it was like, he was just sick and tired of, losing the pin that went into it, or, it wouldn't fit, or you'd get your fingers pinched. And it was like, no, take the motor up, no lower. But it was like all this back and forth. And he goes, I just got sick of it. And his dad, he told me his dad was a welder or something like that. And they just came up with the idea of, basically taking an amplifier and just shove it into the speaker, and they've come a long way since we had that conversation.
But it's funny, I had an audio guy on recently, and I can't remember who it was, but I had somebody on my podcast, and we were talking about PK, and he said, it was Sarah would know, it's her friend. He's a guy who does sound for a band from, I think, Sweden or Finland or something, a real metal band, a hardcore metal band. Really good sound guy. But we talked about it, and he said, I saw the demo. It was kind of cool. But he said, I can't tell you of a single situation when I needed to move the sound system or readjust, the array. And so he said, it's cool, but I'm sure there's extra cost and weight there that I'd rather not have the cost or the weight. So, what seems brutally obvious to me, I guess to some might be like an added expense or something.
I think it has its place, it's one of those where it just, like I said, it has its place, and it was like, if the sound engineer for the band can talk production into having this improve their point, it's like, man, this is going to save on time, and we're going to set up quicker, and especially if we have, if we have 3 or 4 shows in a row, we're coming in late to another venue, this is going to make the setup a lot quicker and more efficient.
Absolutely.
Then why not?
Or, let's say somebody moves the front barricade by 8 feet or something, and suddenly, you need to adjust for the first 5 rows or 3 rows or whatever. It's a fairly easy problem to fix, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
No, I think it's brilliant. To me, it's definitely the next evolution. I just hope they don't like Betamax themselves. You know what I mean? Because if they went out and licensed that to D&B and L Acoustics, the 2 giants out there, it'd be in every sound system. But because they've patented the hell out of it, L Acoustics and D&B are going to be like, you don't need that. That's stupid. You don't need that.
You don't need that. It's
Yeah. So, we'll see how it goes. I mean, the future will tell. But I connected them with, my friends at ACT Entertainment, and that's who's distributing them now in North America. So they have a real distributor now with real inventory and people and service and everything else. So
is that ACT Lighting? ACT Entertainment?
Same company. They're called ACT Entertainment now.
Is it PJ? PJ is the guy over there? Or JP? PJ?
I don't know
I
who
think
you're
I met
talking.
with
Ben Saltzman is the CEO. He's my
Gotcha.
buddy. Um,
Gotcha.
but it used to be Bob Gordon who was the founder of ACT Lighting, and he sold the company to Ben and a group of investors.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
um, yeah. So I mean, again, like that's one of the cool things about. There's not many cool things about being old, but one of the cool things is that you got to see these crazy generational changes of the audio business, and for me the lighting business more so. um, Going from things like lamps to LEDs was a massive evolution for
Yeah,
the
and
lighting
just the other
industry.
day, I was visiting a friend at PRG, and I ran into Clay Powers. Clay is,
Yeah.
he's super brilliant.
Yep.
And he was, he was the president of Shoko. He was my boss.
Yeah.
For years, and then he went over to the Verilight side, and then the VLPS side, and then of course the PRG side. Always on the
Right.
manufacturing side. And he's just a brilliant person. And I was over there, and he was outside, smoking a cigarette on the stairwell. And so we started talking, and he was telling me that, I can't remember what fixture it was, but they're basically getting rid of all the lights and putting in all the innards to make those lights now
VL5s. It was
LEDs. Yeah.
VL5s.
Is
Yeah.
that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. They gutted
So
all their
he's doing that,
VL5s and made them into LEDs.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they
It's totally cool.
they brought life back into those. I was like,
Yeah.
that's pretty
Well, the
smart.
most popular wash light that was ever manufactured was the VL5.
Was the
And
VL5.
there's still guys out there who don't want to use anything else, and who
Yeah.
think it's sacrilege that you're changing the lamp source to LEDs in them.
Right.
But I mean, it's so much more sensible. It's
And
just
efficient. Yeah. No,
yeah,
totally.
yeah.
Totally.
Well, the other thing is, with the whole world being as concerned as they should be, with becoming greener and becoming more sustainable, the
For
cool
sure.
thing about LED is, like, with all the big moving lights that were all discharge lights,
Mm-hmm.
not so much with the tungsten or whatever, but with all the
Right.
discharge lamps, the gas discharge lamps, you couldn't power them down, so you had to shutter them when you wanted them to be dark or off, right?
Right. Right.
And so what they would do is they'd set the rig up in the morning, on tour. They'd set the rig up in the morning, and the lights would be on from, like, call it 11 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night,
They would just
because
burn
you'd never
in.
you'd
Yeah.
never power them
Yeah.
down. They're just burning
Right.
energy all day, all
Right.
night. Whereas with an
Right.
LED, you turn it off. You
Yeah.
don't put a shutter in front of it to dim it. You just dim it and shut it
No.
off.
You shut it
And
off, and it comes right back up where you left it. Yeah.
exactly. So I mean,
Yeah.
that has made a massive difference for venues burning electricity,
For sure.
during the day for these shows. Everything is becoming much more efficient. Sound systems. But did you ever think you'd see a day when amplifiers were like, 15, 20 grand for a power amp?
No. No. Yeah. That's what blows me away, because I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, "Yeah, so and so company wants me to become, a dealer." And I was like, "Well, what do you think? You're gonna do?" He goes, "Man, I just don't know. It's like, you take this speaker, let's say speaker X, and it's like, man, after my discount and dealer pricing, that speaker is going to cost me $12,000 for one speaker." And then,
That's
he
wild.
pulls out the calculator. He goes, "Well, let's say I get, X amount of dollars for that. It's simple math, right? Well, let's take that and divide it into, what speakers cost." He goes, "I have to rent that speaker 88 times to get my money back."
That's crazy.
Think about that. And that's just
insane.
one speaker. Oh, what you got to have,
Yeah.
40, 60 plus or whatever, that's where it's tough. That's why it's like, when I tell people, or when people tell me rather, I'm thinking about starting a sound company. I was like, don't, I was like, it's a bad
It's
idea.
hard, man.
Just
It's
go out
tough
and rent it.
math. It's tough math.
Tough because it's a long, I think audio is, to me, I think it's the slowest return,
audio's moving faster now than lighting did in its heyday, because I just sold somebody a sound system from Europe, a KSL rig from Europe into Canada. And, it was almost $800,000, I think.
Yeah.
And the next day or whatever, I see LMG promoting that they've got the new L series out, on some
Yeah.
show or whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
like, God, we're going to be at Z series in no time here.
Yeah, it
I
was
mean,
like, but I just got, and then it was like,
yeah. Well,
there's
and
there's companies
what's
that
the
are.
difference between a J series and a K or an L series? Like, the difference is that somebody's specking it, so you got to have it,
That's exactly right.
I mean, is the
There's
audience never
somebody
going to
out
know?
there that's gonna want the latest and greatest, and it was like for some of these companies, they'll buy the latest, greatest, and as soon as they're done with it, they're selling it and they're on to the next.
But I remember,
Mm.
and I think it was during COVID, like a friend of mine, maybe it was just before COVID, a friend of mine bought a GSL series, a
Hmm.
GSL rig, and that's ancient now. And I mean,
Yeah,
that was 5 years
I
ago.
know, I know,
That was five
I
years
know.
ago, and now it's
Yeah.
ancient. Like, I never see GSL anymore, hardly.
Mm-mm.
It's all J series, K. Uh, I mean, it's crazy. It's just,
Yeah,
it's,
and there's nothing, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that system. It's just they just came out with something different.
yeah.
Every so many years they come out with something different, and that speaker, is probably puts out more power and it sounds better, and it's always that next,
But what
it's
is
always
it
that
like?
next thing.
So if someone was to say, "Hey, I've got a J series and a K series," how do you explain the difference between a J
I
series and a
think the difference
KSL?
on that were just the components inside, where maybe the J's were like, maybe a 12, whereas the next speakers are like, maybe it's a different size speaker.
Yeah,
Maybe the coverage on it, maybe they have a new amplifier that complements it, that's more
yeah.
efficient than the amplifier from the old. So it's new all the way around.
But again, those
It
amps
does.
blow me away. Like 15, 20 grand for an amplifier.
And
Like,
that's another thing, is just, back in the day, it was like you would never think to buy a self-powered, speaker system, because
yeah,
I remember a client telling me one time, he was doing an exhibit. He goes, "Well, Joe, I can't have powered speakers, up in the air." I was like, "Well, why not?" He goes, "Well, what if something happens to it? What if I lose power?" I was like, and then I looked him right in the eye and I go, "You know what? The lighting guys and the projector guys, they've been running data and power to their gear for a long time now. This isn't any
yeah,
different."
yeah.
And he kind of rolled his eyes, and I got him. He was like, "Yeah, you're right. Okay,
You're right, though. It's
yeah,
totally true.
yeah, it's true." It was like, and it blew me away that, I just remember reading. It wasn't that long ago. I read an article where, before DMX came out, they were just using RS-422, 9 pin, connectors to
Yeah,
control, the very first of their lights, would go
yeah,
to a computer, and then you'd have to have three of these computers, and each computer could run 32 lights. So yeah, the biggest you could have is, 96 fixtures of whatever,
yeah.
very light
So
or something.
you and a partner founded a company, I think, in 2020 called SAV.
We did, and that was Brady. It was
Yeah,
he's my he's one of my best friends, and he and I, like I said, we had started the audio division for VER. We were the two audio guys. He lived in Glendale, and I lived here in Dallas. So, there wasn't a day, we worked together for 20 years,
yeah,
where we were the two guys until we started the VR tour sound part, and then, there was a whole group of people. We were still involved in it, but, that was just another segment of the
yeah,
audio of VR. But the bread and butter for just VR was just, it was just the speakers on a stick, and it was just, just whatever we had. We were just everybody's, solution, when it came
yeah,
to audio,
yeah.
and getting them, the right gear. One time, it was, I'll also just say this. It was like, I always wondered one time, I was like, man, what's the most popular thing that VR rents on the audio side? And I had somebody look up the data, and it turned out to be this push to talk microphone that Shure made. And it was like, if it wasn't on a show, it was, on a transfer to another office to go on a show. They're constantly moving.
Yeah.
And it was just crazy. Anyway, he and I decided, once the company was sold, it went to a private equity firm called Catterton, and sadly they were just, they're just a bunch of people that that wasn't their forte. They didn't know about production. They
Right.
just didn't.
Which
They
is often
questioned a
the
lot of
case.
things and stuff like that. Yeah, they just weren't. It just wasn't their thing. And so, like, and they brought in their own people, of course. And when you bring in your own people, they're not going to listen to the old people,
Right.
that helped
Yeah.
get the company where it needed to be. So it was that. So they sadly they ran the company, into bankruptcy, and
Ugh.
then on the flip side of that, um, PRG was kind of in the same boat. They were struggling financially, as well. So the banks put uh, both companies together and merged both companies together,
Yep.
and that's when. And whenever that happens, when you've got two companies like that, you get two totally different cultures, right? And that's where things just kind of went sideways. It was like, well, who reports to who? Well, we do it this way. Well, we do it this way. Well, what software are we going to use? Well, let's use this. No, ours is better. Okay, let's go back to y'all's because y'all's is more. It was just back and forth, and
Mayhem. Yeah.
that's when we decided let's just move on. You and I know enough people to where we could start something different, and let's just be a niche company in a more specialized field, and that's when we decided to be more into comms, more into RF, and do that. And
So
at the time,
what is SAV as a what's that called? An acronym?
it stands for Sound and Vision Entertainment.
Oh, okay.
And Sound and Vision it was a song from David Bowie.
Oh,
It's a David
interesting.
Bowie song. Yeah, it was.
Huh.
I think he
Who came
recorded
up
it,
with
and
that? You or Brady?
I think Brady came up with it.
Uh,
He came
so
up with it. It's like, let's call it Sound and Vision. Okay, let's call it
you're
that.
either a complete lunatic or a genius for starting a company in January 2020, right
Yeah.
at the front end
Yeah,
of
we had no
COVID.
idea. I remember coming back. I remember we went to NAM in Anaheim in 2020, and it was packed. I just remember. I remember coming back, and I was like, "Gosh, I don't feel good. Maybe I got the flu, or maybe I
Oh
got something.
no.
And it was like, but I kept. I guess I just got through it, or I'm thinking to myself, maybe I had COVID and I didn't know it. But I
Joe,
got
maybe
through
you
it.
gave it to all of us. Like maybe
Maybe
you
I
were,
did.
maybe
I
you
don't
were
know.
number 7
I
or
don't
something.
know, but there was just a lot of, think of all the people that come from Europe and
Yeah, no
Asia and
kidding.
everywhere to that. And it was like, this was long before, there I am riding the escalator, putting my hand on the rail as I go up, just no
Yeah,
telling
as you
what,
do.
what
Yeah.
was going on. It was like that movie, when they're in the movie theater, the guy coughs and you just see,
Yeah. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the germs go everywhere.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that was crazy. But what really kept us going was, I think it was all the TV studios figured out how to keep it going. Was there going to be a big convention with a lot of people where a lot of people can meet together? No, but can you have a close set and people get tested every day and have TV shows and stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. So
But
that's what
what
we
did that
kept.
really look like though? Like, you started the company in January, you came back from NAM and started to realize, hey, there's something going on here. By March,
Right,
obviously, it was full
right,
force.
all right.
But did you guys second guess your decision and go, God, man, maybe this isn't the right time to start a
We
company?
no, we just knew that we had a big gig coming up, and that was the NFL draft,
Hmm.
and at that point we were just like, man, how are we going to pull this off? Because they wanted to do it virtually. So we figured out, with the help of Clearcom and Riedel and some other comm manufacturers, that we can pull this off. They came out with a way where you can there's an app on your phone, um, where you can have comms on it, and we could have a conversation, and you could have multiple channels, just like if it was a multi-channel belt pack or whatever.
Oh,
So
cool.
we were able to pull that off, and
Hmm.
we're able to successfully do the draft, and I remember, we were, Brady was, I was at home. We had another freelancer, at his house, in Orlando, and then Brady was in his garage, there in Burbank, or rather in Glendale. calling the shots. Here we are listening to, and we're talking to Roger Goodell. He was in his basement,
That's wild.
calling,
Wild.
making the picks and stuff like, yeah, it was just, you look back
That
and
is
I was like, man, how did we pull this
insane.
off?
And
So
with
we
the
were
amount of
able
money that's being spent and stuff too, right?
Oh,
Like
I
these
know.
people are drafting players that are going to get
Oh, I
$20 million
know. Yeah. And
contracts and
everything,
stuff.
and everything was just everything was a remote hit. And I think one of the higher up NFL guys, man, we just weren't connecting with. It was always something. And finally we made a phone call and I was like, can we do a speed test or whatever? And his internet was just really low, and I go, man, what's going on? He goes, hang on. I think I know what it was. He had like his two teenage kids were in his basement where they were like gamers, just
Oh
sucking up all
my
the bandwidth.
God.
So I was like, you got to stop that. We can't. You're going to be on TV, and the producer needs to talk to you in your ear and all this.
Yeah.
And so it was like stuff like that. But it was like, yeah, it was just
So the
amazing
show went off okay though.
Show went off great. We
That
actually
had to be stressful.
we just pulled it off, very stressful, but we pulled it off. And then, we were able to we had some other clients, we were doing, some TV shows. We do some TV shows some game shows in LA that we were able to keep that going. And then sports was still they were able to figure it out. There weren't any people in the stands, but they still had a production and they still needed to have comms, they still, the producers and directors, and you got camera people and you got all those people need to take directions. And that's what,
so you guys
that's
stayed
what
pretty
comms
busy
is,
then.
We stayed busy, and, we're like a 4-person company, it's just myself and Brady. We have another person that we, that works, that preps all the gear, and then we've got kind of a operational guy that gets the gear out and checks it in, checks it out, kind of our warehouse, operations guy, that you got to have.
And where's your warehouse?
That's it. It's in Glendale.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's in Glendale.
So you're still small like that. You're still 4 people.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
No, we're small. Huh. We have a long list of freelancers, that we use that are fantastic, that are our go-to people, and that's it.
It's so smart because it's so tempting and so easy to grow, and it's like, oh, but you got all these shows coming at you. Look at all this stuff you could be doing. And next thing you know, you're, up to here in people and debt and payroll and all kinds of stuff.
And that's like, what I was like, our thing was like, we don't ever want to work. And it's not a knock against these companies, but we don't want to work for a company like what VER was, or, these other big box rental companies, where it's just like, man, we've already done that. And we know exactly.
So you don't want to become it. You definitely don't want to become that.
We don't want to become it. And we want to be smart about, we want to definitely be smart about, our purchases. And that's how we were with Vince and VER. We always treated any of the purchases that we had like if it was our own money. Yeah. We just, it wasn't until later on where people would come, hey, we need to buy this. And it was like, at that time, the other company, they would just say yes to everything. Oh, you think we need it? Oh, yeah, let's buy it. And it would just sit on the shelf, or it would do 1 or 2 rentals, and it would just sit there.
But
like nobody knew about it.
It's funny because you mentioned like their systems were a bit lacking. We were doing business on the equipment side with them in the early 2000s, and they didn't even know where their stuff was, how much they had. They had no idea. Like their inventory control was just non-existent. Yeah. I was blown away. As big as that company, like it was just like they just outsold their losses or whatever. You know what I mean? Like
no,
stuff
I remember
would fall
hearing
off the sides, but they were replacing it with so much more stuff that you didn't really notice those losses.
Yeah, it was like that was a perfect example of the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing. Yeah. And I remember hearing stories where it's like, well, where is this gear? It's showing in the system that it's available. They're like, oh, it's in a trailer somewhere, in the Vegas parking lot or something. I was like, well, I got a PO for it. We got to rent it. What's going on? They're like, it's not going to happen. I was like, and then then they got to the point to where a buddy of mine was telling me, he was like, man, you don't believe what I just bought from VR. They sold me all this stuff. And it was like, it was stuff that was like, I was talking to another buddy that still works there, and I told him, like, "Did you guys mean to sell it?" He goes, "No, we need that. We've got a show where we need it." And it was like you said, is infrastructure stuff, like multi-pin stuff, and
Yeah.
and panels and all that stuff that you don't really necessarily charge for,
Right.
but it's part of the
can't do it
kit.
without it.
You got to have it. It's like it's like selling off the steering wheel of your car. Well, you need the steering wheel to sell the car. You can't
it's kind of
just
important.
sell that. It's kind of important.
Yeah, it
So
seems
that's
like
when,
nothing until it's gone, and then you're like, wait a second.
Yeah, and then you're going back and you're like, you're writing a PO to a cable manufacturer. Hey, can you build us more of these? And can you build? It's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, this isn't good. This is
on the
bad.
comm side of thing, like other than this phone technology that you were talking about, have there been any huge advancements to Clearcom and to just comms in general?
Yeah, there's a company out there. Back in the day, it was just Clearcom. It was almost like a buzzword like Kleenex or Coca-Cola. Yeah, I got to have Clearcom. And it was just a way for people to communicate with each other. It was just back in the day, it was just they just had single channel. You had a single channel belt pack, and you're able to talk. Everybody was on a single channel.
Yeah.
And now they have it to where then they built it up to where it's like, oh, I got a 2-channel belt pack. So channel 1 could be like production, and then channel 2 could be whoever else wanted to talk. And then it just kept on growing to where then you had more of a matrix system, where it's like, hey, let's put all the lighting guys on channel 2, and then we'll get the audio guys, and they can be on a different channel, and then you can get the follow spot guy, and then you just start spreading it out. And then, but now, with the truck companies and stuff, they've always had matrix systems to where, you've got multiple channel party lines that can, different groups and different groups can talk to each other, different departments.
Yeah,
so a company out of Germany, they came out, a company called Riedel came out, and they came out with just IP based stuff, and they just came up with just their own software, and they're just a program where they just made it just a lot easier and more versatile than any comm system out there, where you could have multiple party lines. You could have it was just multiple groups and conferences, and you just go bananas. You could do whatever you needed to do, and that was really
that's where it's at
that
now.
really changed things around. Yeah.
And
completely.
Like, what about, has sound quality gotten better? Have ranges gotten better, or any of that kind of stuff?
Way better. Now, Riedel came out with a belt pack that's just so robust. It's imagine having a belt pack that's got 6 buttons on it, and those 6 buttons can be whatever you want them to be. It's like you and I could just have a point-to-point conversation, or you can listen to the entire production, or you can just listen to, the show caller, you can listen to, the lighting guys, or the LD speak to the
spot operators,
the follow spot guys,
yeah.
And give them direction. Which the cool thing about comms is that you're listening to. It's almost like the old, black and white, movies that you see where you'd see somebody behind a big switchboard operator, and you see a line of ladies, and they're just, playing switchboard operators, and they're listening to every conversation.
Yeah.
It's real similar to that, to where, think of it as you're mixing monitors for a bunch of different people out there, and you're giving them what they want to hear, but it has to do with comms, and comms is how you communicate in a big production,
Yeah.
And when you want to hear somebody come unglued because, a producer or a director can't talk to a stage manager or speak to, a camera guy to get a certain shot, and man, it's just crazy. I'm always amazed how things just end up on TV sometimes with just
Why do you say that?
Goes on, which is what goes on behind the scenes,
Yeah. But you mean in like a live situation, like a sporting event or something? In a live
situation, sometimes, yeah. It was like, and sometimes you just, how TV is a lot different production-wise sometimes than what you see in touring. Like touring, they've got all the great connectors, and, every cable is black, and everything's twisted this and that, and, in production, I mean, in TV sometimes, especially live TV, you see guys running orange extension cables or red extension cables, and they're plugging it into the wall, into a power strip, fiber things plugged into it and was like, if any of those things were to turn off or go wrong, I almost feel like your TV would just be snow. Like you wouldn't like it would just something horrific would happen,
Yeah.
And I was like, how is this,
Well, I guess it's because they're sort of building it on the spot, right? As
they're
opposed to building it for a tour.
every situation's different, and it was just some of it's some of it is fly by the seat of your pants. Some of it is just it's kind of it's just temporary,
Yeah.
Because in a few days, it's just or that night, it's going to be gone. It's not, and they're not packing it up and going to the next city.
Yeah,
it's going on a truck, and then you don't know if you're going to see it, on the next gig or whatever.
Yeah, it's just an interesting comment. Like I'm amazed that how some of these things end up on TV.
Yeah. It's amazing how things and what I like about what makes it really cool on the comm side is that it's the only department I think that you're able to work with all the other departments. So with comms, you're able to work with the graphics people, you work with the truck people, you work with the house sound guys and the lighting guys, and you work with the stage managers. You work with every aspect of a production, to create to what you see on TV or whatever, if it's a concert or whatever. And you're working with all of them. And I always tell the younger guys, it's like, if you know how a production gets put together, for TV or even live, how things, what the flow is and how things operate, you're just that much more valuable to the overall production,
So is your overall, your main business is comms?
It's I would say it's 90% comms.
Wow.
We do a lot of and that is both. I would say that's both us going out and working, the events and being there on site, and also just straight up dry hire rentals. There's plenty of companies that call us, hey, I need this. And we just, we'll just send it out, or they'll come pick it up, or whatever. But we do a lot of sports. We do a lot of sporting events, whether it's,
how big?
The Super Bowl. Well, we do the Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
And we do,
what do you do for the Super Bowl? All the comms?
We do all the comms that has to do with just the show itself. So just like any other show, there's a script, and there's, at 4:19, they're gonna do a hit, and they're gonna do a satellite reporter's gonna do a hit down on the ground, or they're gonna do a promotion, or there's a script to follow. So we work real closely with the guys at Van Wagner, and they're the ones who actually produce the home show.
So you're not doing like the coach to the quarterback or anything.
No.
Yeah, you're doing the show.
No, the NFL has their own. They have their own group of people that just do that.
Okay.
And it's another manufacturer that do that. And
what about halftime?
Halftime, ATK does that.
Okay.
So ATK is part of they're part of Claire now.
Yeah.
So they do the halftime.
Yeah.
So they do the halftime, and they do all the halftime entertainment, and then we do everything else. We do the whole game itself, from all the pageantry, the national anthem, and all the stuff that happens before the game, during the game, after the game, all the trophy presentation and
any cool stories too. Any massive crashes or anything? There's
been crashes, but it's part of the things that happen, and it was just recently where, we really work closely with the manufacturers on this, where we'll bring, somebody in from the manufacturer. It's like, and this is like your biggest gig. So you guys need to be here, because there's a lot going on. And in the early days, it was tough because before, and this is all wireless stuff that we're talking about, is that it was just tough. There was a lot of frequency coordinating, and it was just, you just got to cross your fingers, because it's live. It's like anything can happen. Yeah. And but now it's like, we're able to, work with the FCC and work it to where, ATK, they're doing before they would be like, okay, during halftime, we'll turn off all our packs and our antennas, and then when it's over, then we'll just switch back. And it was just all this back and forth. And it was like, now I think we finally, we've got it.
So is that like the
But
biggest show you're doing every year, or
it's
there's
believe
other?
it or not, one of the biggest shows we do is the NFL draft. And
Huh.
there's a lot of moving parts to that because you're working with the NFL Network, you're working with the NFL, and you're working with ESPN, and there's multiple things going on. There's a lot of remote hits. They'll have people like we had to get comms to somebody in Australia because they wanted to do the presentation. Like, if you ever seen the draft, they'll be like, and now so and so is going to announce the 42nd pick, and he'll be somewhere remote, and these guys were
Yeah.
like on the beach somewhere.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, yeah, it was something like that where it was like there's just a lot of moving parts to it. So comms has
Yeah.
come there's come
So NFL's
a
a big
a
client for you
long
then.
way. NFL's a good one, and like I said, we work with Van Wagner. They're the
Yeah.
ones who bring us in, and we're
Yeah.
working with them on stuff like that. We
So,
do some decent amount of corporate shows, and not that
yeah.
long ago, it was just a couple of months ago, we did a rodeo. I've never worked with live animals before. It was the
Huh.
craziest thing, you know.
Yeah. That's funny.
So yeah, a lot of sporting national championships for
S-
we do the U.S. Open. We do sporting
Sarah
events.
said you've worked with 3 U.S. presidents. Who are they?
Who did I work for? Well, I've worked with who did I work with? I worked with George Bush, George W. Bush, and worked with President Biden.
Oh, okay.
All three of them. Whether it was just some of them was actually me, like running sound. I've got my hands on the fader, controlling his microphone. Kind of a
Yeah.
corporate event. And then the other one was just doing comms.
Oh, yeah. That's
It was
cool.
we do a lot of these Department of State type
Yeah.
events.
Yeah. Oh,
In
that's
DC.
fun.
So yeah, no, it's fun. It's you just like I said, you never know who you're going to meet, and like I said, it's just fun to work with other departments and see how they operate. Of course, I have an affinity towards the audio guys because I was an
Yeah.
audio guy, and there's a good chance that, hey, do you know so and so? Yeah, I know so and so. Oh yeah, I know. We used to work together. So it's always fun to talk to
Do you
the
have
audio guys.
Do you have any crazy predictions on gear? Like where you think something's going, or where you'd like to see it go, or
Gosh, I always said it was like, man, that would, back, and it's already happened, but I was like, boy, that'd be cool if you could just walk around with your phone, just make adjustments. Well, they already have that, they already came out
yeah,
with that,
yeah, it's
it was like,
crazy.
so, yeah, I don't know, Marcel. I think of it, and I was like, boy, that'd be cool if it did that, but I was like, I don't,
Well, AI, I think,
you
is
know.
playing a massive role in a lot of different things, audio,
And
lighting,
that's a
all of
thing
it.
too, where it was like, gosh, are we going to be out of a gig? I talked to the guys, and I was like, can AI just can somebody make a request and all of a sudden we're out of a gig and they make the comm change for you or something like that. Somebody still
Yeah,
physically has to set it up and stuff like that. But
yeah. No, I think
could that be a thing? I don't know.
there's a lot of aspects of what you do, what we do, what the world does
Yeah,
that you're obviously still going to need people doing it, but I to me, I still try to look at the positive side of everything AI to it's going to help you. It's going to make you
yeah,
more productive. It's going to make you better at your job, not take your job away from you.
for
So
sure.
I think people who use AI are going to become more valuable than people who don't.
I
Is
think
is
so.
really where it's going to come
I
down to.
think it's just you use it to your discretion, and you can use it or you can't. Just use
Yeah,
it. I think you use it like you said. Maybe just use it as a tool.
yeah,
To help you along. Somebody had told me that there was an AI that you could listen to somebody. Let's say you're middle of an arena, you're running sound for whoever,
yep,
and it would listen to your mix, and then it would tell you, hey, on the lead vocal, and it would just tell you, how to EQ it or what it
yeah,
needs to make it. And I was like, man, that's tough because it was like, well, how do they know how do you know what makes them right? It was like,
yeah.
because audio is just so subjective.
Well, but I think you're going to be able to dial in the subjective.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I want a
Yeah.
warmer sound. I want a
Yeah.
this sound. I want a more this sound. I want it.
Yeah.
The Stones in 1976 at,
See
whatever
that
stadium. I
blows me
want it to
away.
sound like that.
Yeah, I had a friend that worked for at Shoko. Alanis Morissette was one of the artists that we did, and
Yeah.
I want to say it was either the monitor guy or the front of house guy. She would just come out on stage, they would do sound check. She's like, man, my monitors just it sounds like a dusty attic. It was like, what?
That's
And then
interesting.
after a while, or she'd say things like, it sounds like an old shoe. And then he kind of figured out, he'd make an adjustment. So then
That's funny.
he'd have he'd have his notes, right?
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh
Dusty
shoe.
attic,
And
turn
then
down, the 4K
yeah, it was
or
like
whatever.
turn down the mids. It
Yeah.
was like, oh shoe means, add 2 dB of,
Oh
whatever the
God.
formula was.
Oh my God.
And it was like, he'd have
That's
a
hilarious.
whole list of
That's
that.
hilarious.
And
That is
that's
so
True story.
funny.
How do you make that up, right?
A glossary of, Alanis Morissette audio terms.
100%.
That
That's
is
exactly
so funny.
what it was.
Well,
Yeah,
the
you
artists
can't
are
make that
always
up.
right, though. You know that, Joe.
Exactly right.
I mean, they know
if you want to keep your
exactly.
job, you want to.
Of course, yeah.
You want
Yes,
to do
ma'am.
what they tell you to do.
Yes, ma'am.
That's
No,
it.
ma'am. Did we
That's
miss
it.
anything? I feel like we have. Oh, we've talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I can't think
Did
of.
you know Randy Wade?
I do know Randy Wade.
Speaking
I
of
talked to him.
Shoko
Gosh,
and audio
I hadn't talked
analyst.
to him not that long ago. I knew him through mutual friends. I know him through all the guys from like George Strait. They kind of
Yeah.
hang around that. He kind of hangs around that circle of guys. But yeah, I remember he would use VER. I think he was working for Usher, maybe, or Janet Jackson, or
I
one
don't
of
know.
those. I can't
He was
remember.
audio analyst for a long time, and I think he worked at Shoko. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure he worked at Shoko.
Randy Wade, was he a lighting guy?
He
Oh, I'm
was.
thinking of Eric. There's an Eric Wade.
Oh, Eric
right?
Wade.
There's
Yeah, you're
Eric
thinking
Wade. I'm
Eric Wade.
thinking.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's Eric
Yeah.
Wade. There's a Randy Wade. Randy sounds very familiar.
He was a Dallas guy as well, but I'm
There's
pretty sure he worked
There's a Randy
for Shoko.
Bryant. I know Randy Bryant.
Yeah.
He would go by Rambo.
No, I was just wondering if you knew Randy Wade because he passed away. I don't know, 2 years ago now, probably.
Yeah,
but,
no, I heard about that. No,
Yeah.
I knew him, but we weren't, just more
Yeah.
as an acquaintance.
Oh, there's so many people.
Not at all.
It's hard to know everybody.
It is. It
Well,
is. It just
Joe,
seemed recently.
I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and
Thank you.
Like I said at the front end, it's always fun getting to know new people. So I enjoy it a lot,
Yep.
and I learned
Yep.
about comms.
You learned about comms. It's very important.
Ah.
It is. It's part of a production. You got to have it.
Oh, it's huge.
You gotta
again,
have it,
take it away, like the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Take away
Yeah.
comms and let me see how you do your show.
Exactly.
It'd be ugly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Right.
It's ugly. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to email you guys back. I could come up with probably a notebook page of people you could talk to that are
We appreciate that very much
that are
all
really
the time.
good. They're
No,
really
I mean,
good.
Good stories, great knowledge. Like we get young people and old people that listen to our podcast. So a lot of times it's younger people just trying to figure out how the old guys like me did it. Not that I did anything, but older people in the lighting space, older people in audio, how they got successful, how they did what they did, and then sort of try to follow that path, hopefully.
Yeah, mine was just a little bit of both. I went to college, but then I also just wanted to, I kept at it. And I tell all the young guys, like, I've made every mistake. I've left gear in the warehouse. I've, ran cables backwards. I showed up late I showed up the day before. I showed up the day after. I missed flights. It was like every mistake you can make.
Yeah.
I've made them all, and the young guys always ask, like, well, what piece of advice, I'm running sound for this band. I was like, what advice can you give me? I was like, number one job in audio, if you're going to run sound for a band, run sound for a good band, run sound for a band that, singer knows how to sing, guitar player's got a good tone, it's helpful.
Yeah.
It makes your job way easier. If you run sound for a good band, man, you're just, you're pushing
but
things
also
up.
when you do something stupid, have a great attitude about it. Own it, have a good attitude.
Own it.
And it makes such a difference. Like when you start blaming other people, it doesn't go very far.
No, people nowadays they'll just pick you off, and and I say that to young guys too. It's like, if you're going to show up late, then just don't bother showing up,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Show up on time, and if you don't know, tell them you don't know, and
Yeah.
just,
I
whatever you
was
do, just don't
married.
stand
I was
around.
married over 20 years to somebody who was late for everything, and I'm one of these people who's nuts who has to be early for everything.
Same.
And so I'm now divorced, and my girlfriend now and I are exactly the same. Like,
Yeah.
10 minutes before, you're late. You're
Yeah.
late if you're only there 10 minutes early.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's much easier.
I have zero patience for that. I just
Me
can't. It
too.
drives me bananas.
Yeah, me too. And running to the gate for a flight. I just, why create that kind of anxiety when you don't need to?
No, I
It's
know.
just crazy.
I know. And you think people like that would learn their lesson, where it's
Not my
like, boy, I don't
ex-wife.
ever want to do that again.
Yeah, not my ex-wife.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. Jeez.
All right,
Yeah, I
Joe.
can't do
Well,
it.
thank you so much for taking the time to do
Thanks,
this.
Marcel.
And
Are you going to go to InfoCom?
you know what? I'm not. I am going to Canada next week.
Oh, that's right. You told me that.
And I was going to come back a week later for InfoCom, but I don't think I'm going to as of right now. So
Gotcha.
if I do, though, I'll look you up.
Thank you, for sure. Yeah. And tell Brad, I said, hey,
Of course. Absolutely.
You got it.
Will do.
Okay.
All right, man.
So I'm not going to touch anything, right?
Nope. We're all good.